the topic we're going to tackle today is, what are sort of the three primary leaders or roles that we find are present in teams that are really succeeding well. And we, kind of look back over history over, hundreds of different engagements and efforts to launch a new software product. And, there's this trend that we sort of observed that, the ones that are really good, that they launch a great product, they stay on track, they hit budgets, they hit timelines. There's some commonalities among sort of the roles that are covered there on the team. So we're going to explore that today. Before I jump into that, I thought I'd just give a little bit of a quick intro on myself. For those of you that don't know me, my name's Jeff Francis. I'm the founder of N08. We're a Inc. 5000 digital innovation studio. We're based in Dallas, Texas. I've personally worked with startups to launch over 200 different software products. It's probably closer to 300 at this point, but done a lot of these, seen a lot, learned a lot, made a lot of mistakes, and hopefully through these N08 Answers episodes, able to share some of that experience and insights with you guys that will help you avoid some of the common pitfalls that we see pretty regularly. So with that, let's kind of jump in. So we kind of refer to this as your mission critical team members. And I sort of think of this as almost like a three-legged stool, that when you have these different three elements covered well, then you drastically change your odds of success, right? And so we're going to go into each one of these in a lot greater detail, but I sort of wanted to give you like a roadmap here from the onset of sort of what are these three roles. And as I mentioned at the very beginning of the session here, over, hundreds of product development efforts over the years, without fail, the best ones, the ones that have succeeded the most, they had these three roles covered pretty well with a lot of really talented people. And so I thought it would be worth exploring these, talking about them, talk about the dynamic between them, why is it so important, and what are some different ways to sort of ensure that you have the right coverage on that. And one element of these that's really important is that in each of these different areas of responsibility, there's very clear ownership over that specific domain. And so let's dive into what these roles are. So, at a high level, the first one is someone that's really that product visionary. And I'll talk a little bit about what does that mean and what does that look like. The next one is a technical delivery leader, right? And then the third one that I'm going to talk about is someone that owns UX, right? So the first one here, role number one, the product visionary. This person really deeply understands the problem. They're very intimate with the problem. They understand the users. They understand what the pain is, and also they have a great vision of how does their product fit in to solve that pain. And these folks, they may not be technical, they may not even be experienced building software products a lot of times, or designing software, right? But they do really understand the target users, or the customers, and they have a very clear vision for how that product fits into to be in the solution for those people. And there's some other attributes I'll get to in just a second around communication, that kind of thing. But at the highest level, this is the visionary for the product. They know where you're trying to get. They know what it looks like. They know how painful it is and important it is to solve. And so you have to have that person on the team. There has to be a very clear vision. Or else you can't even get the rest of the team sort of rowing in the same direction. So this person has to be present. The other thing about this is that they also have to really understand the business case for the product. So how are we going to monetize this? Like how do we drive an ROI? How do we make it work from more of a business standpoint? What's the value proposition? How do we sell it? That kind of thing. So they need to be strong on that front. Who this person is can be quite different in various types of organizations. So I sort of broke this into two different types of organizations. One is a startup, and another one is more of a growth stage company, or maybe even like an enterprise type of environment, right? So if we start first with startups, very oftentimes this is the founder, right? So when you're small, you don't have a very big team. The founder is typically the one that is the visionary. They have a clear picture of what the problem is they're solving, and how do we need to craft a product that users will love as an end result. They may not understand how you get there from terms of execution and actually like building it, but they understand sort of what it looks like when it's in the hands of the users. And some kind of interesting observations about really successful founders that we've worked with is a lot of times their previous experience to when they started this company um, was in that actual domain that they're building the product for. So in a lot of cases, they've even experienced the frustration and pain that they're trying to solve firsthand. And a, a, a lot of what led them to actually build the product was figuring out that there's not a great solution. So a lot of times they fit hand in hand because their vision for how to solve it came from the fact that they tried to solve it a lot of different ways and could not find a great solution. So they decided somebody should build this and somebody should solve that. And so that vision kind of comes hand in hand with the founder a lot of times. Um, it it's very fortunate if the founder does have software development experience or product development experience, but they very often do not, and that's not a showstopper. It's just you have to make sure that you know where those gaps are so that you can figure out who on the team can help shore up those holes, right? Now, the other type of organization is more of a growth stage company or an enterprise where it's probably not the founder, it's not even the CEO or maybe a high level executive. It could be more of like a product owner, more in the true sense of like a product manager or a product owner, where that's their role within the organization. But the same responsibility and needs exist in that environment as well. They really need to understand the user. They really need to understand what the problem is. They need to understand what the competitors to solving that problem are, or or I like to say it a little bit different than competitors, but the alternatives. Like if they're not using this product that we're building, what are the alternative ways that they're going about dealing with that problem today? Right. And that can kind of help you figure out where your problem lines up to be unique. And so, um, an important thing about the product owner, when you're in a bigger organization, is that they do need a certain level of authority and agency to be able to make decisions and move things forward. I have seen where product managers or product owners can get really frustrated in that role when their instructions are coming from above and they're really just a pass through. They're not really like a decision maker on really setting the direction for the product. And so, in order to be trusted with that level of autonomy and decision making, you have to have pretty good experience. So when you're in a larger organization, these product managers probably do have more experience building and launching products, or at least it's great if they do and preferable. But at the most fundamental level, the core skill needed is that they have to have great vision for what the pain is, how our product solves it, what the users are experiencing, high level of empathy with really like understanding what users are going through is very valuable in this role. And if we think about sort of the different skills these people have, other than a couple of things that I just mentioned there, I mentioned communication a little bit earlier. That may sound obvious, but communication is super important in this role because a product manager or that visionary role, they're the ones that are getting everybody on the same page and everyone enrolled in what they're trying to accomplish. And there's such a variety of different people involved with launching a product that can be a challenge sometimes because people are coming from such different perspectives. For example, if you're talking to developers, they're going to be typically focused on the technical aspects of how do we actually implement this. If you're talking to designers, they're going to be maybe a little bit more tilted towards the visuals or what's the user experience like when they're dealing with this. These product owners or visionaries are also the ones that are talking to other stakeholders outside of the primary product team. So this could be executives, this could be other departments in a startup environment, this could be investors, this could be advisors that are involved. It could be the sales team that's actually out there talking to customers. It could be the customer support team where they're talking to customer support. They're turning around, translating that into roadmap that can be executed by the dev team. So communicating to a variety of different stakeholders that are looking at it in a very much different perspective, and communicate in a wide variety of ways is a really important skill set for someone in this role. The other one that I put here is having some sales skills or some persuasion skills. It doesn't mean that they're a salesperson necessarily, but in the product visionary role, you're constantly selling, right? You're selling stakeholders on why your vision is correct and what you guys should do in terms of leading the product development and the roadmap. They got to sell developers on making sure they're bought into the decisions that are getting made. They got to be able to do the same thing with designers. I see in startup organizations a lot of time this visionary or this product manager, or if it's the founder, they're very involved in the sales process. So they're selling directly to customers, right? So having sales skills or that persuasion skill, that's very valuable for somebody in this role. And then the other one is I think that having a fair amount of an analytical mind, like being able to look at data, look at research, digest it, figure out what applies to what you're trying to do, and then translate that into executable sort of plans on the product development front can be really important. And so, it's not just about knowing a feature and what it should look like on the screen. It's really taking that close relationship with the customer or the end user and then matching that against the information out there. This could be things like competitive analysis, gap analysis, looking at the alternatives for how users are doing this, understanding the buying process for whoever you're going to be selling this to. Those kinds of things need to be weighed in. So I think someone who's pretty analytical minded and can sort of digest that information, then communicate that, enroll people into your plan. Those three skill sets combined with a really strong vision can be ingredients for a really strong product visionary, right? And so I talked about some of these: the communication, sales, persuasion skills, business acumen. The business acumen I didn't talk about that like on the previous slide, but that's just sort of a general feel for how do we sell this, right? And how much can we charge for it? And who are we actually going to need to be targeting to try to sell? Like, is it direct to the user in a scenario where you're selling more of a B2C type of product? But sometimes when you're selling into like a B2B environment, who you're selling to is not the same as the end user. So being able to understand that landscape and lay plans for how does your product demonstrate value to the different people that are going to have to buy into it in order for them to choose you could be really important, right? So again, I'll stress, they don't have to be highly technical. If they are, that's terrific. They don't have to understand product development, like actual software development life cycle real well, but it's a great advantage if they do. But they have to have that core sort of skill set of a strong vision and really understanding the users. Role number two in the trio is a technical delivery lead. And this is a job title that if you go out there and look at job boards, you may not see it described exactly that way. So I'm going to take a little bit of time to talk about, well, what do I actually mean by this? And there may be a variety of different job titles that could kind of map to this role. First off, this role varies greatly based on the organization size, right? So it's going to be different, that person in a startup, than they would be in a large organization. In a startup, it might be like a lead developer. This could be a really strong developer. Maybe you only have one developer or just a handful of them. So they may not be like a bona fide delivery lead with like sort of a background and experience or a resume that sort of says that they're a delivery leader, quote. So sometimes it could be like a really strong dev. They're going to have to wear multiple hats, right? There can be some gaps that show up there that I can talk about in a second. But if you think about in a larger company, this is going to be a little bit more of a bona fide delivery leader. So they're very likely coming from a background of being a software developer um, for quite a long time. This is probably a 10 years plus at least type of person. They can get deep into the code if needed. A lot of times they have to in the particular team that they're working with. But what's most important is that they've really been around delivering multiple successful software products and getting those into production. And so they're navigating, these technical conversations, and they're also helping bridge the gap. So what you're going to find as we talk about these three different roles is it's very important that they're working very collaboratively together because they fit and complement each other really well, right? Other things to note about this person is like the end decision maker for technical decisions, right? So this could be everything from tech stack to architecture to infrastructure. Sometimes they get really low level into code decisions, right? Especially in startups, because they're working directly with the developers, and their ability to go deep into the weeds to sort of understand recommendations or the direction that developers are taking and correct if needed, or to validate decisions that are being made that are kind of at a lower level is really important here. Not just because you want to pick the right technical direction, but it's so important to actually ship your product. And sometimes you'd be surprised when you have really great developers that write really good code, that take a lot of pride in the quality of what they're doing. They can make decisions that are sort of academically very correct or very elegant, but they don't account for the business objectives and actually moving the product forward and balancing what is perfect with what is good enough to get you to the next stage or to your next objective, right? And so this technical leader can really help understand those types of things that are coming up from the developers, but also balance that against more of the business objectives, right? And so, and then, again, much like the product visionary, they act as a translator sometime. They understand the very deep technical elements of what needs to be decided on, but then they're translating that to the product visionary, the stakeholders, the designer, even maybe product or customer support teams, that kind of thing, right? So they will tend to play that translator a lot in their role, right? And if we think about, you know, what types of day-to-day responsibilities do they have? They actually have a lot on their plate. Um, One of the main things that I think they play an important role in is things like estimating effort. So as the product visionary is identifying priorities and roadmap items, then the technical leader can help translate that into, well, what's the lift going to be for building that? How many dev hours? How much timeline is it going to take? So what's the magnitude of these things that we're potentially going to take on? And the estimates on that stuff can weigh very heavily into how you end up prioritizing things. For example, you could have two different options. One is a really heavy effort, one is much less effort. Having an accurate and trusted estimate on what that effort's going to be can help the product visionary give better direction on priorities. They're also managing timelines. So they again, they go real low level with the developers. So as they're doing their high level estimates, that work is eventually getting broken down into smaller pieces like tickets or stories or tasks that are in the project management system that the developers are actually working on, but they can help sort of make those different work items map to larger objectives. Another pitfall that happens a lot is if developers are the ones sort of creating tickets and managing those tickets, they tend to have a very limited view on those things. They look at things one ticket at a time instead of sort of gauging it inside the broader context or the bigger picture, right? They're also designing architecture, database design, They're setting a long-term plan. They're helping to guide and ensure that you're staying on that plan as you're proceeding. They also look at things like I mentioned earlier, deciding stacks, deciding frameworks, languages, um, assessing potential integrations. That's something where you probably would have this person involved, is where you're oftentimes making these build versus buy decisions on, would we build this functionality on our own, or is there an alternative where we can perhaps leverage a third-party product and just integrate as the way to satisfy the requirement. They would typically lead that kind of stuff. And then they're also doing like code reviews. So they may not do all code reviews. They certainly probably don't as you get larger, but it's valuable to have this person still involved in the details of the code so that they can potentially review pull requests or weigh in on code sort of as it's coming in, right? And I mentioned this earlier, just helping them take the vision from a technical standpoint, having a clear picture of where they're trying to go technically with the product, and ensuring that they're aligning towards that. Because one thing that's very important is you want to make good architecture decisions about your product, but you have to do it in context. So some things that might be perfect may not be what you need right now, but you want to try as best you can to align how you're doing it right now with the longer term vision of where you're going, so that in the future you can avoid potential like significant refactors of things that are at the architectural level, right? So that's a technical area. And then one key thing to think about here is that it's balance is a really important element for what this technical lead is going to be focusing on, right? So I mentioned example earlier of where perfect may not be the right choice for where you are with the product. Oftentimes it's not. Everybody ideally would like everything to be perfect and done exactly the right way, sort of a purist view, if you will. But it's important to have someone who has sort of that business element, or that business acumen element, so that they can review things that are technical decisions to make within the context of what moves the business forward, moves the product forward. And so sometimes I find that developers, that's difficult for them to do because they haven't had more broad sort of business case exposure. So when you have a technical lead that can sort of bridge that gap on, this is what we got to do from a business objective standpoint, this is what we want to do technically, what's the right sort of mix there, that can be really valuable. Okay. And then moving on to the sort of the third element of the trio, right, is someone that's serving in the role of the sort of UX strategist. And what I try to do here is draw a distinction between just a good visual designer and someone who's really the user experience leader. And you need that person, or you need that skill on the team, even if it's not a dedicated resource, which I'll talk about in just a second. But you have to have someone that's looking at this at a bigger or a higher level than just visual designs. Do the screens look good? Do we have all the features represented? Do they really understand the user journey, what our product roadmap is, and where we're going? And they're making more user experience decisions in conjunction with just visual design, right? So they need to have good user experience capability and visual design, ideally, right? Things that they may work on. Well, let me back up. Yeah, this person is also going to be very tightly aligned with the user, right? So I talked a lot about how the product visionary, one of their key skill sets is they're very in tune with the end user and their frustrations and what's valuable to them. This user experience person needs to be really close to that level. So they're if you think about the technical person and the UX person, UX is sort of the advocate for the user, and they're looking at this from the user perspective. The technical leader tends to look at it more from the development team perspective, the execution perspective, and it's a great complement when you got both of those sort of working together. I've been on a lot of teams where we've got a really strong UX leader, got a really strong technical leader, and it's just a beautiful thing to sort of watch how the two of those roles interact together and how well it complements because they're looking at it from such a different perspective. Um, in terms of what actual things they do, kind of like what we talked about on the technical leader, like when, like day-to-day types of activities, early on, they're going to do things such as creating and defining user personas, being really clear about the user from a persona level. And if you haven't seen one of those before, I think it's an underappreciated asset in the process that can be very valuable, not just in the product development, but I find it that it helps a whole lot with marketing and really understanding your sort of go-to market strategy a lot of times too. But when you're putting together good user personas, those are typically going to you actually have a face and a makeup name, a make-believe name. You're going to define what do they typically do, where do they encounter problems or obstacles or frustrations, how are they solving those today. um, I also see good personas where you try to get in their head and think about like what are the thoughts that are occurring to them as they're experiencing that. So this UX leader will create personas. They'll also create your user journeys or journey maps. So where we're really laying out what's sort of the overall journey that a user is going through today, right? Not necessarily mapping our software out, but we're mapping sort of the process from the user perspective. What different stages do they go through? What are they thinking at each stage? What are the different tools and resources are they using at each of those stages? And what are they trying to accomplish? And what are the key thoughts that they're having as they're kind of stepping through that? If you can map that out, and a great UX person can do that really well, that informs your product roadmap very heavily. And it's something that you need to continue to update because it could potentially change as you learn more. But definitely up front when you're building a new product is one of the like more critical steps in the process that does get skipped a whole lot. They'll also do wireframing, even prototyping in a sort of a wireframe sort of stage, because they'll be working with the product visionary, sort of capture their vision. What is it they're thinking that we need to do? They'll sketch stuff or wireframe stuff. A lot of times the trio, the visionary, the UX person, the technical lead, they'll huddle around those wireframes, talk through those. And again, this is one of those kind of cool examples where the UX person is looking at, how's this going to be experienced by the end user? But when the technical lead looks at wireframes, they're thinking things like, okay, well, how are we going to accomplish that functionality? Is that going to be an integration? Do we have those endpoints? What kind of back-end work are we going to need to support that? Like, what kind of database changes are we going to make? So it's funny how two different people can look at the same artifact and be thinking about totally different things, both of which are really important. So the wireframing also sort of a first step where the tech lead can start to formulate, high level estimates on, okay, what we're representing here, what's going to be the effort for us to actually build that stuff. And then, of course, and I talk about it a lot, one of my favorite artifacts is the design prototype, like sort of full fidelity comps, if you will. And so taking those wireframes, moving those forward, and actually putting the visuals on that, making it clickable. And then that gets handed back to the product visionary where they're able to confirm, yes, this is what we're going for. This is what we need to build. The technical lead takes it. They go talk to the development team. That helps them paint a clear picture about this is what we got to build. And so, this UX person is sort of at the center of those conversations, trying to take the conversations, take the direction from the visionary, translate that through the process to end up at a design prototype, is a great like space for this person to fill, right? And then, a learning here that we actually, encountered over the years is early on, we used to do sort of a more heavy um, design type of phase up front. Our version of that today, we call it the innovation lab. And we actually pair these three folks together in our innovation lab. But in the early days of sort of creating our lab concept, they would work together and get to a certain point, and then there was more of a handoff to the team to go execute and build on it. And one of the things that we learned is that it is so vitally important that that UX strategist stays involved throughout the execution of the build phase. Now, their involvement may not be as intense, like they may not need as many hours per week when you get to that step, but there's so much that got discussed, considered, and sort of defined or designed up in the design phase. And when you don't keep them consistently plugged into the process going forward, lots of gaps can form and they can be quite painful actually. And so by having this UX person plugged in, once you actually start to execute and build on this stuff and involved in demos and product reviews, that kind of thing, it really helps to make sure that you don't get off of track from your original plan. And is as much work as you can do up front on the design front, there's still a lot of gaps. There's still a lot of stuff that's not going to be defined completely when you go into development. And so having that same consistent person to help plug in and close those gaps as you're executing can be really valuable. So I would highly recommend that this person stays plugged in, as well as that technical lead throughout the execution part of your effort as well. So now we've talked about these three different key roles, right? Product visionary, technical leader, UX leader. Now let's talk a little bit about what are the risks or what happens if you don't have all three of these, right? And so at a high level, there's kind of three big ones that I identified here. One is delays in your product delivery, right? You miss things. You misestimate, you misjudge, you have misalignments, you have missteps, things delay, you may not build the right product. So, this trio with strong players and each of those working tightly together really helps ensure that whatever your timeline is that you're targeting, you end up hitting that. And keep in mind, timeline is very closely tied to budget. So it would be really infrequent that you go over timeline and you don't also go over on budget. So it's ultimately going to impact on the budget front as well. Another thing that will show up a lot if you don't have this covered well is poor technical decisions. And poor technical decisions can show up in a couple of different ways. One can be you just make the wrong choices and you go off script and you build something the wrong way, which can be really painful because you're going to have to potentially rebuild that. And rework means more cost and more timeline, right? Or it can also show up as instability or just problems with the product working properly, right? So that's one flavor of poor technical decisions. The other flavor of poor technical decisions is that you're trying to make great technical decisions, but it's not in context of what's right for the product. And that it's a different problem, but it's still a problem. And the way that one will show up is back to timeline, right? You'll be working towards something and you have trouble hitting timelines. A lot of times that could be because the developers are doing things that they believe is technically right, but it's taking away the effort that could be used in a different way to help push the product forward. So back to being able to properly balance priorities with, perfection, right? So, and then the third one here is a poor user experience. And I like to stress that the poor user experience is more than just it doesn't look good, right? Poor user experience can be that the flow is just maybe a little funky, right? Or it doesn't make sense, or it's confusing, right? And so the users, you're going to have a tough time building a lovable product if the user experience isn't pretty frictionless. So that's where that UX strategist sort of fits in to help shore that up too, right? The other thing I'll mention here is without a technical delivery lead or a leader in that role, you also get impact on poor product or project management a lot of times. In a small team, if you don't have a bona fide project manager, this delivery leader will fill a lot of those gaps. But without a strong leader there that you can really trust, you're going to have other challenges, such as, when you're adding developers to the team, how able are you to assess the capabilities of people that you're adding to the team, right? The leader typically will fill that, right? So that's one example. I talked about the estimates already, so estimating gets really hard. And just scope drift. And that can come from Maybe the product visionary is giving new instructions. Well, the technical lead needs to be able to counterbalance those instructions with, well, here's what the impact is going to be to schedule if we make that change, for example. So, um, we're going a little long on time, so I'm going to try to wrap up. One last note here is I thought I would talk a little bit about roles that a lot of times people will hire that can be very valuable, but if hired at the wrong time, can kind of work against you. So I'm not picking on anybody here, so please don't be mad at me if you're one of these roles. Um, these are very valuable, but at the right time. And so um, I use the example of when you're very early stage. So this could be early stage startup companies, or this could be maybe early stage in a product, in a product development effort. But three big ones that come to mind are, a CTO. I get asked this a lot. It's like, I need to hire a CTO. They don't even have a team yet. I'll talk about that in a second. The second one is a solutions architect. You may be asking yourself, well, hold on a second. You said you need a technical leader. Like, why are you saying you don't need a solutions architect? Well, a solutions architect is a little bit different than what I'm talking about in a technical leader. Oftentimes, the technical leader can be the architect, but you likely would not have a consistent enough need to support hiring a full-time solutions architect. So the hope is that if you aim for the technical leader, you're going to be able to cover most of what you need from an architect role in that leader. If you don't, or if you're not able to do that with the skill set from your technical lead, then you can supplement that, but with a fractional or like a part-time or an as-needed architect to just help review the stuff that's really heavy architecture. So the mistake that startups will make a lot of times is they'll hire a solutions architect as one of their early hires. And a great solution architect, in my experience, they don't do a whole lot of coding, right? Now, they may still like to code and they still code quite a bit, but they're not going to be your primary resource for doing the development work. Um, the really great solution architects that I've worked with, they really enjoy the creativity of solving the problem and creating the architecture and designing the architecture, but then executing on the same architecture for a very long time, they kind of get bored with it. And so then it makes it really hard to retain them. And so there's lots of forces working against you hiring a full-time solution architect when you're really early. And the similar thing happens on the design strategist front. Design strategists are especially the really good ones, they're very experienced. It's not an inexpensive resource to add to your team. And so most of the time, a early stage team can't support hiring someone who's really a bona fide design strategist full time. All of these roles I'm talking about here, there's good options today where you can get sort of part-time or fractional help. That's something that we actually at N08 do for a lot of our clients is we can fill those gaps where there's a real need and it's important, but the client doesn't have the budget or the consistent need to support that sort of full-time role in-house. We can supplement it. Sometimes you do freelancers too. So there's a lot of folks out there that are really talented that they are either freelance consultants, that's all they do, or they may moonlight or freelance on side of like a full-time job, and they may have enough capacity to give you what you need and really make a significant contribution, but you're sort of just paying for it as you need it, not all the time. And so some thoughts there on some roles that are truly important. The last one I didn't talk about was the CTO. CTOs, please don't be mad at me. I've talked about this topic in one of our earlier N08 answers. CTOs are really valuable, but I think people confuse what is a real CTO role with what is really needed. And so an early stage software company hiring a CTO is a little bit of a mismatch because CTOs are a little bit more at the leadership level, not at the, like getting their hands dirty in the actual execution of the work. And so if you get a bona fide CTO, that's the type of work that they're looking for is leading, setting vision, relying on their team to execute the instructions that they're sort of deciding on. But usually what you need when you're early stage is you need doers, right? So CTOs can be very valuable to early stage companies, but probably not in a full-time capacity. This is another one of those roles where you can find some really great options and sort of a fractional sort of arrangement where they can fill the need, they can make the impact, and then you can use most of your budget and your bandwidth for actually executing on the work. And then as you get bigger, then it might make sense to hire some of these roles full-time in-house. As always, if you have questions on this topic, or if you have suggestions for a future topic, or even feedback on anything I covered today, even if you disagree with me on sort of what I've laid out here, I'd love to hear that input from you. If you could drop us an email to info@no8.com, that's ENO and the number 8.com, or I'm pretty active on LinkedIn, so you feel free to direct message me on LinkedIn. There's my URL. And then I mentioned a little bit about our innovation lab, where, we really sort of bring, the skill sets represented in that trio. If you'd like to learn more about that, you can check it out on our website at no8.com/innovation-lab. And it gives a pretty good overview of our innovation lab and sort of the type of work that we do there. And if you're interested, go ahead and reach out to us and contact us. Be happy to talk with you a little bit more about that. And then, the other options there could be, if you've got some of these roles covered already, but you just need some assistance filling in some of those gaps, that's something that we help a lot of our clients with. So we'd love to chat with you about that. Hope you guys got some value out of this today. Again, reach out with feedback, and we'll see you on our next episode. Thank you, everyone.